Well, thank you, Mike, for joining us on this episode of Artist Materials Advisor. We're talking about silver point and this ancient medium and how it's used today in contemporary art. And so I want to
Good.
welcome you, Mike, to this session. Um,
Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome.
and can you tell us a little bit, give us a little bit background, how you started in art um, and what's the main focus of your art today?
Sure. After college, I had a career in the Air Force, and so I came to art making kind of later in my life. When I started making art, I gravitated to painting, and a friend of mine told me that I should look into encaustic paint. I didn't know very much about it. He didn't know very much about it, but my search led me eventually to the Theo mummy portraits at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. And I was hooked after that. I was just fascinated by them and I wanted to learn everything I could. And so I started on about a 2 decade long journey learning about encaustic paint and making realistic landscapes with encaustic paint. And along the way, I I wanted to do it the way the Romans did it with natural earth pigments, and so that led me to natural pigments, and that's where I got my pigments to paint with. And while I was on your site one day, I came across an article. I think it was an article about silver point drawing.
Mhm.
And it was something that I had heard about, but really didn't know anything about again. And so it sent me off on another tangent, and I started doing research about silver point drawing, and that led me to doing a lot of experimentation with different kind of grounds and things. And so that's what got me into the drawing part of it.
So I noticed you do a lot of different work in you've worked in different medium oils and I noticed some work in egg tempera. Is most of your work in which you mentioned encaustic is would you say most of your work is in caustic medium?
Well, that's a good question. For the past 20 years or so, I've been pretty much an encaustic painter.
Hmm.
Spread in between there, there's been some oil painting and egg tempera painting. I've drawn all along with different things, but just kind of recently I started really getting excited about metal point drawings.
Hmm.
Mostly silver and gold, but I've done a few other things. And so I have a show coming up in March that will be just silver point drawings.
Oh, okay,
Actually, metal point drawings. There's a few gold drawings in there too.
sure.
Um, and so for the last 3 years, that's been my focus is metal point drawing.
Oh, okay, I
Yeah,
see.
but
So
yeah.
what are some of the things that you like about silver point as opposed to, for instance, other types of drawing medium like charcoal and graphite?
Yeah. The very first thing that really caught my eye about metal point drawing was looking at Michelangelo's drawings. I
Hmm.
saw a show that had several of his drawings in it, and while they're nothing like my drawings, they fascinated me with how delicate the line was, and how I like how it tarnishes. I think that's pretty cool.
Hmm.
The silver, and um, they have such a different look, a different feel than graphite or charcoal. They feel kind of in a way special to me, and so that line of Michelangelo's is what really got me going about it. And while I don't draw with a lot of line, I draw with a lot of shading and tonality, but that's what first got me excited about it. Yeah.
Oh, great. What are some of the challenges you find with silver point?
Um, well, it's very slow, and I like to get heavy heavy shading with it. And so that takes a lot of time, a lot of patience. So I will, when I'm drawing, I will take breaks in between and do smaller drawings or small doodles, sketches in between, getting ready for paintings and things like that. And then just keep going back to it. When I'm working on a larger silver point drawing, I'll leave it out in my studio, and so that I can look at it all the time, and then just pick the tools up and draw with it at any time. I'm not a plein air kind of person. I like my studio, so it works well for me. I'm in my studio a lot, and I can then just sit. But the time that it takes to draw with metal point is certainly a challenge for me. It made me have to slow down, which was probably a good thing. But so yeah, that was definitely the biggest challenge for me. I really like the process of preparing the ground, preparing the surfaces to work on. I like drawing on paper rather than hard surfaces. I've done both, but I like the paper much better. I like finding different kinds of papers. Right now, I really like Twin Rocker paper.
And the grounds that you're so you're applying a ground onto the paper, is that?
Yes.
What kind of grounds do you find to be useful for your silver point?
Well, putting a plug in for you guys, my favorite is the silver point ground that you guys saw.
Oh, okay.
I found it to be the most consistent and the easiest to use for me, and so I continue to go back to that. I've tried a lot of different things. I've even made my own grounds. I've found in my research coming across formulas for different grounds that the old guys used. I like messing around with that stuff, and so but for consistency and really coming down to using something perfect, I really like the ground that you guys saw.
Oh, okay. Well, great. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
You find, of course, that the grounds are not pretty important, but very important in the end result of the image.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. In my show that I have coming up, I have about 25 different drawings and maybe 4 or 5 different kinds of grounds that I experiment with. And you can really tell the difference especially when you put them side by side, you can tell the difference in how the surface looks, and the whole drawing has a different look depending on which ground it's on. Yeah.
How do you protect the final drawing? Framing, glass? What are some of the things that you do for that?
Yeah, well, I always mat them with conservation mats and then put them under glass and frame them.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
I've experimented with a few sprays to seal the drawings, but I've never gotten the courage to spray a final drawing yet with one of them. It seems like every time I use a spray of some sort, it changes the surface a little bit, and so I just don't want to do that.
Right. You mentioned, of course, you worked in, besides silver point, what other metals have you worked in, and can you talk a little bit about what are some of the things that you like about these different metals?
Sure. I've used gold quite a bit. I really like gold. Gold is smoother than silver, and you can get darker darks with gold than with silver.
Which most people think is counterintuitive, because they're thinking of the color gold as opposed to the light it makes.
Right. Yeah. You don't see the gold at all. Yeah. Which is really kind of funny, and it's kind of curious why you don't. Yeah. The gold, of course, doesn't tarnish, and so as the one thing that I like about the silver is that the silver does tarnish, and it just gives it a very nice patina and makes the drawing look cool.
Sure.
It makes it look neat over time, yeah. So silver and gold, those are my two main ones. I've used copper. Copper is fun, but it's harder
Mm,
and it's a little more difficult to control. And then it gets a kind of that greenish tint to it as it ages, and I don't really care for that too much. I've used steel wool,
mhm.
and steel itself, soft steel. Those are nice, but again, much harder than silver or gold, and so it's a little more difficult to use. And I've done one drawing with lead.
Oh, okay.
um, it it turned out nice, but it kind of scared me working with it. I just didn't. I just don't think I need to worry about the poisoning part of lead. So
Yeah, sure,
so I put that away.
sure. What would you, so we have, of course, there's going to be a lot of artists who have never done silver point before who may be watching this. And what would you, what advice would you give them, or what would you tell them starting off in silver point?
Um, if you're drawing with graphite or charcoal, both of those mediums have their drawbacks in that they can be messy.
Hmm.
There's a lot of technical things, especially with graphite, and that you need to understand the hardness of the lead that you're using, what kind of paper you're drawing on. There's a lot of things with graphite that I find much more challenging than I do with silver point. With silver point, getting the ground correct is the hardest part,
Hmm.
but it's really not that hard. I
Hmm.
mean, it's really a pretty simple thing to do, and you can put a ground on just about any surface. Um, and then you have one tool, and that's your silver tip or your gold tip. And so it's really very easy to get started with. It's kind of the simplest form of drawing, really, except for the ground. You can't draw directly onto paper; it won't make any mark at all on a plain sheet of paper. But putting that ground down is just similar to putting a ground on a canvas for painting too.
Hmm.
So it's not that big a deal, really.
Great. Okay. Michael, I want to thank you for joining us on this this episode of the Artist Materials Advisor, and of course we look forward to having you back again. In which case we'll be talking about encaustics.
Thank you very much, George. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.